Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I am Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined once again by Meg Wochnick, coming to you from the First Pacific Financial Studio in downtown Vancouver. And it's the most wonderful time of the year, football state playoffs. We are here, Meg. We made it, and we have some exciting things to talk about today.
We made it, and so did 4 of our teams in Southwest Washington.
4 of our teams. It's a hard road to travel to become one of the top 16, or in case of the 1As, top 12 teams left in the state. But this is where the stakes are highest. This is where the games are most exciting. And we have a fun theme for you today. We are going to play a game of which stocks we are buying headed into the state playoffs. It could be a player. It could be a unit on maybe the offense or the defense, or it could be like a strategy that a team has adopted. But these are the stocks we think are going to pay off in the playoffs.
Pay off, hopefully in a big way.
Yes. So if you followed our results over the weekend, 4 teams won their Week 10 preliminary games. 2 of those are in the Class 4A. Camas, which enters the 4A state playoffs as the number 1 seed, they will host Curtis in a first round game, Curtis being the number 16 seed. And Skyview, their resume was good enough that they were given a home playoff game as the number 7 seed. They will host Bothell on Saturday. Camas plays Friday, Skyview Saturday. We're going to have to wait a week before the 1As get into action because both Seaton Catholic and Center got one of those 4 coveted first round buys into the quarterfinals of the Class 1A tournament. Seaton Catholic, the number 2 seed overall, Center, the number 3 seed overall. You called it last week, Meg, so kudos to you. Both those teams setting themselves up for what they hope is a deep playoff run.
Absolutely. So they basically have essentially 10 days to 2 weeks to prepare for their quarterfinal opponent. We won't know who they are until probably Saturday night.
All right. Well, let's start with the Class 4A teams, and starting with Camas. Meg, which stock are you buying in the Camas Papermakers?
For Camas, I'm going to buy the play of the offensive line. This was a unit, a group that maybe at the start of the season, at the start of practices in mid-August, really wasn't talked about as a real strength for Camas, given so much strength to other positions, not only defensively, but offensively as well. But the continued growth and the rise of this group is something that Coach Adam Matheson has really praised a lot in our conversations over the last couple of weeks. 4 of these 5 guys up front are first-time starters on this offensive line. And you look at the play of Jake Davidson and his deep ball threats in the receiving corps, and they're giving Jake a lot of protection. He's only been sacked, I believe, 10 or 11 times this season, opening up a lot of holes for the run game. And that run game is something I think is still a bit of work in progress, something that Matheson also talked about. Hey, let's try to kind of get the run game going. So Titan Brody is their leading rusher. The senior has already over 100 carries for more than 500 yards. The team rushed for 130 in their win over Stadium last week. Granted, a bulk of those came when the game was probably in Camas's favor with a 4 and 5 score lead. But I think the run game and the play of that offensive line is going to make a big difference as they push toward a deep run in this postseason. You know, you had mentioned it when we were sort of doing our preparation for this episode that this sort of identity really suits the identity that Adam Matheson's teams had when Mountain View was playing its best, a physical offensive line and a running game that you could really count on. It is. So something during the 15 years that Adam Matheson was at Mountain View from 08 to 22, something that was really unique was usually the quarterback of his Thunder teams were either the team's leading rusher or among the top 2-3 leading rushers. And we're seeing that with Jake Davidson. He is tied for second as far as rushing touchdowns. He's also alone in second for the number of rushing yards. And so he really wasn't that running threat a year ago under Jack Hathaway, but now we're really seeing Jake Davidson as that overall complete quarterback.
Well, speaking of Jake Davidson, I am buying stock in Jake Davidson's arm. And the reason I am saying that is because if you look at one element of Jake Davidson's game that has really improved from last year to this year, that has been the accuracy. through 9 weeks of the regular season, Jake Davidson has improved in his passing accuracy, completing 70.3% of his passes compared to 63% last year. Now, that's still very good, 63%, but you just look at that little difference, and little differences make big differences in the playoffs. He has completed 145 passes for 200 or over 206 attempts in the regular season for more than 2,200 yards. It's that efficiency that not only makes Camas so dangerous in the passing game, but really opens things up for that emergent running game that you're talking about.
It is, and I'll throw in an extra stat. So that 70% completion rating is tops of all 4A quarterbacks. His throwing touchdowns as well as passing ranked second to Moses Lake's quarterback, Brady J., a team that lost in their Week 10 game against Camas. So just continues to be an outstanding season for the senior quarterback.
Well, yeah, I think that was one of the things after last year. We were like, okay, they have a good quarterback, a quarterback that earned all league honors. But what we have seen over the 10 weeks of this year is that ascent from a good quarterback into potentially a great quarterback.
You said it, and he is on pace right now. If things should continue the way they hope to be at Camas, he might have 50 touchdown passes by the end of the season. And if Camas papermakers hope they have any control of that, it's going to be through 14 games through that first week of December.
Yes. Well, we've set the stage for Camas. Let's go to Skyview. Skyview, like you said, the number 7 seed. They host number 10 Bothell on Saturday. Skyview, no stranger to deep runs into the postseason, having made the quarterfinals last year. And, a team that within the last decade has made it as far as the state semifinals. Meg, what stock are you buying in Skyview football?
For Skyview, I'm going to buy their defensive front. They've got a tremendous 3-4 defense. They've run a great cover 2, and we'll get to that in a second. But this defensive unit, Sawyer Maybauer at the nose, and you got ends with Ryatua and Levi Webb. This is an absolute beast of a defensive front. So they definitely had their way against Juanita, a 33-0 game to advance to the round of 16. But you talk about guys like Ryatua, first and foremost, if he was 3 inches taller, this guy would be Power 5, no question about it. So the way he just gets off the edge. And on the other side is a guy in Levi Webb who you look at him, 5'10", 205, 210, and he just blitzes through that offensive line. And what's unique about him is he's that rare combo all-league D-end running back combo. You never see that in high school football, much less at the 4A level. So I'm going to put my stock starting with that front line of that front 7, which is having a heck of a year. And I mentioned the great cover 2 defense that Skyview has, that with those 2 high safeties, the cover 2 really limits those big plays, and Skyview hasn't given up a whole lot of big plays this year. But I will buy stock into that 3-4 up front.
Well, this has really been Skyview's identity going back to last year, when their defense, of course, made all the headlines, giving up only a little over 7 points per game throughout the entire season. And there were a few games earlier in the year, and some of that might have had to do with the opponents that Skyview stacked their early season with, but we're kind of waiting for the emergence of that venerated Skyview defense. But I think it's safe to say they were really, even though they came out on the short end of their massive tilt against Camas, they were really the first team in going back to week 1 that kind of held the papermakers at least a little bit in check. And if Skyview does indeed make a run here through the 4A state playoffs, that defense is going to have a lot to do with it.
It is. And so back on Saturday in that shutout win over Juanita, holding Juanita to, if I remember right in my game story, I think it was about 125 yards of total offense. I was talking with a 4A playoff seeding committee member before Saturday's kickoff at 2 o'clock at Kiggins Bowl. And this committee member told me, if Skyview wins, he is not leaving that seeding committee until Skyview gets a home game. And I thought, woo, Woo! That is some statement right there.
That is commitment.
It was, and that was well before the 2 o'clock kickoff at Kiggins Bowl. So you look at the opponents and the strength of schedule of Skyview. They were very well deserving of that number 7 seed hosting number 10 seed Bothell. We did see a couple of upsets, like I thought would happen last week. One of them being Moses Lake upset by Kamiakin, a Kamiakin team that's a 15 seed. And if Skyview gets through, they'll face the winner of that 2-15 game between Sumner and Kamiakin should they get past Bothell on Saturday.
Well, when you talk about Skyview, obviously that defense will have a lot to say, but so will the offense. And that's what I'm buying stock in, namely Skyview's passing efficiency with quarterback Doogie Poindexter. An interesting stat I found in doing my research for this, in 4 of the last 5 games, Doogie Poindexter has had 18 or fewer completions, but 200 or more yards. That means when he is passing the ball, it's usually a high percentage pass that goes for a lot of yards. And when you have someone like Gavin Packer who can break a touchdown on any play, you'd expect that to happen.
Doogie was a perfect 9 of 9 starting the game against Juanita, ended up finishing 15 of 19 for 258. All 3 touchdown passes going to Gavin Packer, including just a beautiful play right over the middle. Blown coverage for Juanita as well to Gavin, and given his speed and whatnot, that's going for a touchdown 10 times out of 10 when that play is drawn. But I also would buy the play of Doogie Poindexter, just his growth and maturity as that quarterback, a first-year starter, as a senior, watching him play that Week 2 game against Graham Kapowson, and he was hard on himself. He threw 4 interceptions. A couple of those were tipped and intercepted by Graham Kapowson, but he knows he could have played better, and we're starting to see that growth and maturity as the weeks progress with him.
Well, yeah, when you look at his performance against Juanita, 15 of 19 shows he's taking care of the ball, really cut down those turnovers, and putting the ball in the hands of those playmakers, and that's what makes Skyview dangerous. I think when any given play, they might be able to break one.
Any given play, right.
All right. Well, those are the 4As, and now we go to the 1As. Of course, the 2As and the 3As, we didn't have any local teams survive Week 10, but that's okay because what we don't have in quantity, we are making up in quality, and that is certainly the case with La Center and Seaton Catholic. Last time Seaton Catholic took the field before they cruised to a Week 10 playoff win, they won a very hard-fought, dramatic game up in the mud at La Center to decide the Trico League title, with the Cougars winning the Trico League for the first time. They will play in the quarterfinals the winner of this weekend's game between number 7 Life Christian Academy and number 10 Kings. There has been a personnel group, Meg, that we've been talking about with Seton that you're buying stock in that I think kind of has gone under the radar but has been crucial to the success of the Cougars. What are you buying stock in?
I might be buying my most stock in the big boys up front, and that protection, that offensive line of Seaton Catholic is absolutely outstanding. Size-wise, experience-wise, you look back to their historic season last year on the way to the state semifinals, they were pretty thin, not only on the O-line, but the D-line as well. And so many of those guys, 6'7" total, I'm talking linemen, had to go both ways. So they have the size and they have the depth. And one interesting tidbit is their left guard, Austin St. Amour, is now their starting center. And if you don't know who Austin is, go ahead and put him up on Huddle and look at his frame. 6'8", 340. Find me another center who is that big, much less at the 1A level. That is pretty impressive. Colton Gesser, he's only been sacked once. They do a fantastic job of protecting him, opening the holes in the run game for Jacob Williams. I think the holes are big enough for people like you and I to run through.
Not me.
It is just absolutely a fantastic unit, and much praise goes to really those guys up front for really setting the tone for this electric offense.
Well, you talk about find you another center who's like that. Find you another high school kid who's built like that. Yeah. But I think this harkens back to to kind of one of the original talking points that we entered this season when we were talking about Seaton Catholic. Is Seaton Catholic, the whole narrative was we had a breakthrough season last year. We got farther than we ever had. We set a ton of program records, made a ton of program history. And then we went up against Royal in the state semifinals. And then we saw what it takes to win a state championship in Class 1A football. And what Royal has is big boys up front. And now Seton has those big boys too.
And they have the depth. And I think really as they go to this postseason push now, the depth, not just up front, but all around is really going to be a difference maker for the Cougars as they kind of look toward possibly another rematch with Royal, but they got to get past the quarterfinals next week first.
Well, and they got to get past the quarterfinals and then potentially a rematch against La Center in the state semifinals. Of course, La Center would have to beat the winner of either Montesano or OMAC. History with both of those teams for the Wildcats. OMAC eliminating the Wildcats last year in the state playoffs, and Montesano, La Center going on the road week 1 to beat Montesano, but we can get more into that later. But Montesano is a much better team than that week 1. But before we move on to La Center, I'm going to tell you who I'm buying stock in on the Seaton Catholic side, and that's a player that we've talked a lot about for his versatility and his offense. But I am buying stock in Joe Kalarami on the defensive end, namely the defensive backfield. He plays safety as well as doing a little bit of everything on the offense. But against La Center, in their Week 10 game last week, he came up with 2 interceptions and key to defensive effort that was really impressive and very important, I think, going into the playoffs, in that throughout the Trico League season, when Seaton Catholic was kind of overmatching its opponents in the regular season, they were never really tested by a team that could throw the ball deep. Well, you're going to be tested by teams that can throw the ball deep in the state playoffs. And this is where I'm looking to an athlete, kind of the quarterback of the defense in Joe Kalarami, to really be that guy that can disrupt, prevent those deep balls when a team is trying to take the top off your defense, and allow that offense a big margin of error to score the points it needs to advance.
It is. And so Joe, second straight game now, he's had 2 interceptions. He had 2 against La Center, in addition to 3 touchdowns. He is a tremendous, just all-around athlete. He is committed to West Point, and that is a secondary and a defense that can be really, really scary good. So I think as we look toward that postseason run, there's a chance they could face Life Christian. That's something we might get into next week if that's a matchup. There's definitely some talking points I would love to discuss on this show if it is indeed a Seaton Catholic Life Christian matchup, because I think that is a really good matchup for both teams. But I definitely think these last 2 weeks we've seen Joe really, really step up his game, even more so that we've seen in the last couple of years from him. So he is having just another fantastic season, and we've really seen him really kind of go to another level of what he's able to do these last few weeks.
Well, it sounds weird as much as we've talked about Seaton Catholic, as much as we've said they're a contender not only for the Trico League title but also to make a deep run at state. I felt like through 8 weeks we didn't really learn much about this team because they really hadn't been tested. Then they were tested week 9 against La Center. They fell into an early 14-0 hole before even, it was an onside kick, and it's kind of a fluky thing that they got into such an early hole. But we learned a lot about the resilience of that Seaton Catholic team, especially on defense, that after they got kind of punched in the mouth right off the bat, they pitched a shutout after going behind 14-0 to end up winning 29-14. And I thought that showed me something.
Some of the players post-game, when I asked about trailing by 2 scores before even taking an offensive snap, talked about just their poise, their maturity, and some teams, it's when you're down 2 scores, 4 minutes, 50 seconds into the game, that can hit you in the mouth pretty hard. But at no point did you see really that panic among the players. It was just put your head down, drive down the field, and ultimately Seton did that, getting a 30-yard touchdown run by Joe Kalarami to open the scoring for them. So you saw a lot of poise and maturity in that Seaton Catholic team, trailing for the first time all season with that 2-score deficit right off the bat.
Well, I think it says something about Le Center that they were able to really test the Cougars, and I think Le Center is saying, let us have another shot. Let us have another go at the Cougars. And so I think with the Wildcats, they're going to be really interesting to see how they approach this state playoff. And I think they got a very good draw in getting that number 3 seed, getting that coveted first round bye, like we said, and potentially getting a rematch against a team that they handled pretty well in week 1 in Montesano, if Montesano is able to beat OMAC. But that being said, Montesano, that's a better team than they were week 1, a team that knocked off perennial power Nooksack Valley to really raise their stock. But speaking of stock, in Le Center, what stock are you buying, Meg?
Yeah, for the Wildcats, I'm going to go with senior Houston Coyle. If you remember last year, he was their starting quarterback really for the final 7-8 games after a season-ending injury to Garrett Mount, who broke his collarbone in week 2. And he's back as part of that dynamic receiving core with Parker McKinney. And now looking ahead to the postseason, you kind of wonder, are there going to be opportunities, certain packages, certain play sets, certain schemes where we're going to see Houston Coyle maybe take snaps under center? So, when you have this bye week and so much extra time to prepare for an opponent, it's also a chance for coaches to maybe implement some new plays, and particularly if we're going to see a possible rematch with Seaton Catholic and Le Center, a game most likely going to be at McKenzie Stadium over Thanksgiving weekend. They're probably going to each have some plays that we have not seen through 10 weeks of the season so far. But I think the play of Houston Coyle is really maybe that X factor for Le Center. He's a tremendous safety. I think of that 45-yard interception return for a touchdown against Columbia White Salmon. I think of that 90-yard kickoff return for a touchdown in the first 14 seconds of the game. In that loss to Seaton Catholic is really kind of showcasing his skill set beyond just the offense and the defense.
Well, if there's one coach that we know is not shy about trying some unusual looks, some unusual gadget plays, and putting players in situations where it kind of gets them out of their comfort zone, that's John Lambert.
This is true.
I would not be surprised. In fact, I'd be shocked if we didn't see something that we have never seen Le Center try before once they get into the playoffs.
And a few gutsy calls. That was the first, the onside, successful onside kick was the first of 3 that Lambert and his staff called against Seaton Catholic. So a lot of tricks up Coach Lambert's sleeve in his 25 years at Le Center.
Yeah, he's a wily veteran. When we talk about wily veterans, maybe you don't put that label on a high school kid who's 18, but you can talk about poise, maturity, and experience, and that's the stock I'm buying in Le Center, is their maturity, namely this year's senior class. If you go up and down that roster, so many of the key positions are occupied by impact seniors. You're talking about Isaac Cromie in the backfield. You're talking about Houston Coyle, like you just mentioned. You're talking about Wyatt Aislinn, the quarterback who transferred from being a center in last year's team to now being quarterback. Again, we've written about that. You don't see that very often. You talk about a senior like Parker McKinney, the leading receiver on this year's Wildcats team. And then you're talking about those kids up front, that unit of offensive and defensive linemen that have been playing together as they've come up through the school system in Le Center through middle school. And you have a cohesive unit that knows each other, that loves to play with each other, and is knows how to come together when the stakes are the highest.
And they're protecting a quarterback who used to be one of their own guys. Wyatt Aislinn was their starting center last year, as you mentioned. Max Cook now is in that starting center spot. I was talking with Mason Klein a couple weeks ago after their win over Kalama up in Cowlitz County, and I asked about kind of that communication, that continuity with this group. And like you mentioned, he talked about that friendship between these guys, and he talked about how so many of them, even though they may have been playing different positions maybe the last couple of years up until now, they have been playing together for so long, and that really makes a difference. We talk about how important gelling is on that offensive line, and this Le Center group is no exception of it. So we see that continuity. We see a tremendous senior class that is experienced, but they're also hungry to win a state playoff game. It's been a minute since that happened at Le Center, so they can definitely do that next week against the winner of this week's showdown first round matchup between Montesano and Womack.
Well, you talk about this team being hungry, you know, when a lot of these kids that are seniors now were really starting to get involved in paying attention in the youth feeder programs to Le Center. Those were the years when Le Center was making back-to-back state semifinal appearances. So these kids grew up as youngsters knowing that was the standard. But in recent years, you've seen, whether it's been Kashmir or Womack, you've seen Le Center fall just a little bit short of making that deep run into the state playoffs. But I think not only with the advantageous bye that they've been able to earn throughout by having such a good regular season, but just the hunger and the maturity and the feeling that this has all been building toward this. That's what I think makes Le Center a dangerous team in the playoffs.
You said it, and I think, kind of going back to the seeds, that 2-3 for the Trico, what's really great is both of them are on the opposite side of Royal.
Yeah.
I think at this point, Royal is just on a one-train mission right now. You look at the scores. How many times this season have they won games 76-0? I mean, my goodness gracious. That is the kings of 1A football right now. So when the seeds came out on Sunday, it was not only it was at 2-3, but it was, okay, they're not on the same side of the bracket as Royal. We can take another breath in favor of those two teams.
Yeah, well, we'll get to the potential Royal matchup. We hope it happens, because that means a team from here will probably have made it to Husky Stadium, but it all starts for the 1As in the quarterfinals, and they know that they're going to have to take care of business then. Well, it all starts for every team that is still alive this Friday in the first round of the state playoffs, but we also have other sports coming to their conclusions. We got state soccer first round matches starting tonight as we record this on Tuesday. I'm headed over to Yakima for 1A, 2A state volleyball this weekend, but the biggest spotlight is going to be on football, and we can't wait to see how our local teams fare as they try to navigate these tough brackets. We'll be there the entire way. Be sure to follow us on social media at 360 Preps. Follow all our stories on 360preps.com, and we will see you out at the field.